have an unidentified flying object.
I'm Jack Oswald, and you're listening.
This is Mr. Hammer, and you're listening to...
I'm Richard C. Hoagland, and you're listening to...
I'm Art Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
We have an unidentified flying object.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I am your humble host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels, where it happens to be a little past 7 p.m. Pacific Time, PM PT, which is post-meridium in the Pacific Time Zone. Of course, we are broadcasting internationally, but let's go from west to east. So our guest, who you have seen on social media and have also heard on this show and several others, whom I will only say vague things about until you either go look up who it is or just wait for me to announce who she is. There's the first clue. It happens to be a little past 10 p.m. on the East Coast. And of course, where my co-host in the United Kingdom is Johnny Webb, coming straight at us from London, where 3 a.m. He's literally awake just to do this show, 3 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Welcome, everyone. I hope you are ready for an awesome night. This is truly an awesome guest, very well educated, author of 2 books, a great website, and her lectures are truly amazing, and I could attest to that as I have witnessed one myself, and also was there when she released her latest book, How to Talk to an Alien. That must give you spill all the beans. And don't forget about the other book, Psychic Intuition. The person who we've been speaking of course, happens to be the one and only Nancy Du Tertre. Nancy, welcome back.
Oh, thank you so much. What a nice introduction.
Well, let's talk about your website real quick, skepticalpsychic.com, right?
Right.
So, you post on there almost daily predictions and other things like that?
I do, yeah.
So, can you tell us something that you've written in, let's say, the last couple of months, maybe when last time you were out of the country, and there's been some major world events going on. I'm talking about, of course, the election. You have these massive fires on the West Coast. You have flooding on the East Coast and pure devastation that we haven't seen in quite a long time. Not to mention this incredible, sad rate of these murders, both between people killing cops, which I've never in my life seen at that high of a rate, ever. And then, of course, the other way around, too, officer-involved shootings. A lot of them, obviously, justified people coming out with guns, but then, of course, there are a lot of them that were people that were killed with unarmed, and so I could see where all the uproar's coming around in not this country alone, but internationally. Everybody's dealing with something, so we seem to be going through very turbulent times. Were you able to see any of this in the past?
Well, let me explain one thing. So that website is called theskepticalpsychic.com, and what I do is I have one of the pages on there is Prophecies and Predictions, and it's sort of like an open bulletin board, and I make predictions, and I post them, I date them, and it's open to anybody else who wants to make a prediction. And the whole point of doing this is because what I do, I'm a trained psychic detective and a trained medium and a trained remote viewer. So, I really rely on feedback. And I also at one point decided that it was kind of important to in a way, kind of put my money where my mouth is, in a way. So, if I was going to make a prediction, well, then put it out there, give it a date and a time stamp, and then see if it happens, and try and match it up with any type of real-time world events.
I love remote viewing. I think that's one of my favorite topics just shows you how capable our minds could be, especially if you train on them. We know our government, the United States government, and international governments, the Soviet Union, was testing remote viewing or psychic spies back in the 60s and 70s. We had the Stanford Research Institute. Of course, I've spoken to Gerald O'Donnell, who runs the Academy of Remote Viewing and Remote Influencing, and of course there's Joe McConigal, amongst others. So I think it's a very fascinating field. Have you ever been able to see anything off this planet?
Well, let me back it up a little bit, okay? Because I didn't get to the kinds of predictions I do.
That's right.
I don't. So I see things in many respects that are sort of global events, and I see many. I tend to tune into many types of political events. Sometimes I tune into catastrophes. I know a lot of other people that tend to tune into, only devastation and catastrophe. That's not the only thing that I tune into, okay? Mm-hmm. So I do tune into a lot of political stuff. I recently posted about the elections. Whether or not anything I have to say on the elections is going to come out to be accurate, I don't know, because this is maybe the craziest election cycle I have ever seen in my entire life, and I'm not sure that it's going to end up the way that most election cycles end up. But
I actually would have to agree with you. It's not just the craziest in our lifetime. I think it's probably the craziest in the United States history, literally.
I think it might be. I really do. It's as I said in the particular prediction, one of the reasons why I think I had a problem putting anything out there for so long on it was because I'm dealing with what feels like a similarity of quantity or quality or whatever you want to call it between the two candidates, because it's very hard on a psychic level to distinguish the two of them, which is very strange. But, they're sort of, they're friends, their families are friends, they both seem to lie, they both seem to have certain quasi-criminal, or at least walk the line that we know about criminal activities. They both do it. And so it's very hard to separate them in terms of figuring out, okay, well, who's the winner, who's the loser here. Certainly in the past, I've been able to come up with stuff that, I just get astounded by. If you go back far enough, you could see, for example, one of the things that I think I predicted was the vote by the number of votes of which pope would win, mm-hmm. The papacy.
Was this prior to Francis or Ratzinger, who was then became Benedict?
It was after. Yeah, it was Francis. And there were certain things, certain aspects of his background. Of course, I have no way of knowing these things, but then later, in sort of researching about him, I was able to see there were certain accuracies about them. There, and then you have, obviously, your plane crashes. Yes, you have your. I've predicted things that seem to be rather accurate because they would come up like the next day or two. Or there was a really devastating train crash that was along the eastern seaboard, and I had a lot of those. I tend to dream about, as opposed to putting in a focused effort to predict them. So they come in a lot of different ways, and they come with different types of data, but they're really interesting. And doing, I can focus in on remote viewing. That's a very intentional type of an activity. I can also now, one thing that I do with some of my clients, because I give readings and that kind of stuff, and I just recently, for example, I had a psychic detective reading that I did, mm-hmm. and I really wanted to put in some extra time on it because it involved a potential murder. And so I made myself focus on it the entire previous night. So I dreamt some clues, which turned out to have, I think, some significance in the case that were verifiable. So, I mean, you can get your subconscious to start working on whatever you want it to work on in like a million different ways. And it's really cool.
I'm actually glad you mentioned dreams, because one thing that I've been was taught is obviously when you wake up, usually what happens the moment you start using your conscious part of your brain, you start to forget your dreams almost immediately. So the best thing to do is try to remember your dreams and record them. So for instance, you wake up, right? Ideally, you should have a digital voice recorder. Again, this is just advice that I'm relaying, or that I've heard from a few people. And what you do is you start retracing your dream exactly from what you remember without really moving. Keep your eyes closed. Don't move. Maybe have your digital voice recorder somewhere right by you where you literally can just grab it and touch it without essentially moving. And start recording everything. And then later go back, maybe a week later or a month later, and transcribe everything from the voice recorder into an actual writing. And once you do this for over a long period of time, several months or years, you'll start to remember your dreams a lot more fluidly. You'll have much more of the details. And that's that. Remember, everybody out there listening, the devil is always in the details within your dreams. It may not be the overall dream itself, but it may just be the particular details that you'll end up to start see that will start to intersect with the outer world. Is that sort of what happens with you, Nancy?
I've been writing down my dreams for decades, and I've gotten to a point I don't need to write them down because I remember my dreams from every night.
Yeah, so you've gotten to that level. So you're a perfect example. Now, would you say that's a great way to train yourself to become psychic if you haven't been psychic when you were born?
Yeah, because what you're doing, I mean, I really think that if yes, I'm just trained. I'm a trained person, and what I tell everybody all the time is, you know, if I can be trained and learn how to do this, anybody can. So in the training process, one of the things you really have to learn how to do, it's not just like learning how to access that, like, you know, secret information or whatever, but it's learning how to get into your psyche, get into like this weird nonsense world of like stuff that seems kind of crazy, doesn't really make any sense, it's not logical, and there's weird imagery and all of that, and you're in there and you're experiencing it. Okay, good, you got there. But then there's the, you know, on the way out, you got to bring it back with you, and that's called memory.
Yes.
Because if you can't come back into the conscious world, and it's very similar to when you wake up in the morning, and all of a sudden it's like you open your eyes and poof, all of those dream things, it's like, it's weird, they just suddenly disappear. It's the same thing when you go into those semi-trance states or those psychic states or whatever. You're in there, you know you're there, you're in the right place. But if you can't come back to the conscious world with that information remembered somehow, then it's not worth it.
It's not of any use. Exactly. You know, what's the point if you can't bring it out to the conscious world and use it and share it?
Right.
Now,
right, exactly.
Your last book, I presume it's your last. You wrote Psychic Intuition first, and then what came out in 2015, what I got from you in September at the MUFON Symposium, was How to Talk to an Alien. That's your most recent, and Psychic Intuition was prior, right?
Yeah, and I'm going to correct you. Actually, I've published 5 books.
Oh, okay. I apologize.
But they're on all different subjects.
Well, so. let's go ahead and talk about them in order. Go ahead and list them out in order. Obviously, I could already say this to everybody out there. I did misspeak, obviously, by just having these 2 in front of me. But anybody, if you go to our website, drjradiolive.com, which, like I say, every time at the end of the shows, that's the only phrase you need to remember, because that is the same name for every social media account. So go to drjradiolive.com, click on the books and videos link, find Nancy's name, and then click on it, and it'll take you to her author's page on Amazon, and you'll see all her books there. So, yes, I was totally wrong because I just have these in front of me, and I didn't know that.
No, I appreciate that, and for the purposes of this kind of work, they're the most related, so that's the most important.
Okay, well, let's talk about how to talk to an alien, because that has made some amazingly great waves in the UFO community, and people even outside of it, even skeptics like Robert Schaefer. He got a copy and he was talking about it off air. Of course, he didn't want to talk about it on air. The only thing he wants to do when he's on air wants to debate people, which is fine. It's gotta you gotta be friendly with everybody, especially someone who's going to be at every single event. But nonetheless, Paul Heller, a great friend of ours, I know you had a chance to see him as well. He also spoke at the MUFON Symposium. He talked about that book, afterwards after reading it, and I thought it was just really fantastic. And not just the title captivates everybody out there, because everybody wants to know how can they talk to an alien. And then you have to take people also take into consideration, well, do they even talk? Don't they use telepathy? Some people say, well, their words aren't flat, they're three-dimensional, and sometimes they're like vibrating or pulsating three-dimensional figurines, sort of. So there's all these factors that come into play. So let's go back to the beginning. What gave you, what brought you to write this book?
And I got asked that at some point, and I said to myself, why did I write this book? I really had to think about it, and I wasn't quite sure. And the only thing I can think of that makes any sense to me is that this would have been, 5 years ago. And I might have told you this, but my daughter and I went to see a movie just locally, like a couple of minutes from where we live.
Mm-hmm.
And we came out of the movie theater around midnight. There was nobody there. We end up we had a major sighting. There was a huge, it was a mothership. It was the size of a football field, and it was just sitting in the sky, sort of, it was 500 to 1,000 feet up in the air. It was half a mile away from us, and it did a number of things, and it was amazing. And I was shocked, because at that point, I was not interested in UFOs, and I didn't particularly, I had no interest, because as far as I knew, I had no reason to believe in them. And anyway, but after that, my daughter and I would have our phone calls interrupted by these weird voices.
Were they like electronic voices, or they were some sort of living being, but that were not human?
They were very weird-sounding electronic voices, and they sounded like they were coming through a very thick distortion field. They would interrupt the two of us. We could both hear the voices, but we couldn't hear each other, and it would talk and talk and talk. I couldn't really make out what they were saying, but they were clearly talking, because they were creating phrases and saying stuff. At one point, I did hear them say my daughter's name, and she heard it too. And then when they were done, they would always hang up, and then it would disconnect the line. And then my daughter and I would try and call each other back, and then we wouldn't be able to. Our phones would ring and ring and ring, and then for about 10 minutes before we could reconnect. And then that started to happen between her and some of her friends and me and some of my friends. So it was that, and it was clear to me, that it was not a problem with the phone lines. It was not third-party, bleed-in of anything.
Yes.
It wasn't that. It was something so strange and bizarre, and everybody else who heard it said the same thing.
And it doesn't sound like it was the normal clicking noise of the NSA with their, spying on the...
No. And believe me, if they got that, well, then they were in for a real treat on those ones, because it was highly unusual. And what I learned after that, and I did write about it in my book, How to Talk to an Alien, is that, and as I learned afterwards, we're not the only people that get those types of phone calls, but many, many, many other contactees have received these very similar types of phone calls, and they've been interpreted in a bunch of different ways. There's a well-known physicist whose name is Jack Sarfati. He received them when he was, I think, 12 years old, and this voice, this cold electronic voice, which he didn't remember receiving. It's almost like he got put into some type of his memory was erased, or he was in a trance or something. But he was told that he was one of 400 gifted kids who was going to basically develop an artificial computer of the future that was the voice that was talking to him.
That voice was the AI that he created in the future, you're saying?
Exactly.
Wow.
And that he would be meeting certain other of these people in 20 years. Well, then he goes and he meets all the people, the physicists over at the SRI, Stanford Research Institute, the guys who were doing the research on remote viewing, and Uri Geller.
Yeah.
And Uri Geller, who heard those voices also, he's heard them. And by the way, I've heard them when I have interviewed Uri Geller. And, so it and then you have other contactees, like Betty Andreasen Luca.
Yes.
Who she also heard them, but she connected them immediately, directly with alien entities who were giving her prophetic information. Unfortunately, I believe it was about two of her kids who ended up being tragically killed in a motor vehicle accident. You had other contactees who received those same weird electronic. It's a combination of voices and these weird noises, like metal being hit, and then musical chimes, and I mean, people described it all different which way.
That's right.
They've described it as being contact with aliens. So you have it. Some people think it's contact with us from the future. Some people think it's contact with AI from the future. Some people think it's aliens contacting us directly from wherever.
Another dimension, or like you said, either in our galaxy, another star system, or even, let's take it one step further, in our universe, but another galaxy. And of course, I'm glad you brought up Uri Geller. He's a fantastic person, fantastic guest on the show, and so is Betty Andreasen Luca, along with her husband Bob, and one other person. Although there's been a lot of things, because, I'm starting to think that once you're given these powers, if you start to misuse them, if they're given to you by someone else from someplace else, then they're going to take them away from you by misusing them. Well, one of these people is Stan Romanek. He clearly had a lot of amazing videos and things that were provable. From laboratories saying whatever was caught in the film is actually there. Then you have a lot of third-party witnesses, sometimes numbering in the hundreds. But there was a case in 2014 that he did start faking some things to keep his name on top, and he was exposed in 2015. Then he's had some other personal battles that I don't want to get on the show, but the reason why I bring him up is because he has recordings. I forget the name of what he labeled, because it sounded like an electronic voice, but of a woman. And she told Stan that, and it sounded like a young girl, but clearly not human. Like you said, with the electronic chimes coming in and out, sounded like a 1980s long distance call, but very long distance. And she was saying that she was his hybrid child.
Wow.
Yeah. And there's recordings of this. And they said on the caller ID it would come up as all zeros or all sevens. And they have recordings where they're calling Stan and his wife Lisa are each holding a phone, so they're both listening to it, talking to another friend, and then out of the blue, this other person, intersects in the call and starts talking to them, and that's what he's brought along on a lot of these lectures when he spoke at the UFO Congress and one of the MUFON. I don't think he ever spoke at the symposium, the annual symposium, but he did speak at his local MUFON in Colorado. But nonetheless, this is a phenomenon that I think is very important because two things. First of all, we have to acknowledge that something or somebody is reaching out to us. And then the bigger thing is the message. What are they trying to tell us?
Exactly, because the first step is you got to recognize that there's an attempt to communicate. That's the first thing. The second thing is if they're attempting to communicate, then what's the vehicle? What's the method? What's the language? You got to figure that out first, and then once you get all that down, then you get to okay, so what are they saying? What's the message? And that's the most important part. But you got to lay down a whole lot of groundwork before you get to the message.
Agreed. And obviously, is there anything you can tell others out there who, because one thing that I feel happy about is that enough people have come on this show to talk about their own experiences of being taken and contacted where they, in the past, would have felt as if fearful of doing so because of the ridicule that has been put in place, especially in the United States and the Western, G20 countries versus other countries where the ridicule factor is not really there. But today, it's a lot more open. But a lot of people have come on and talked about their case for their first time, inspiring others to come on and talk about it. But there's still a lot of people that communicate via the website or in other means that are not quite ready to come forward, but are teetering on the brink where they say they have something they got to say, but they don't want to say it yet, or they don't feel comfortable yet, or they want to wait a little longer. If there's anything you could say to other people that are experiencing this phenomenon, what would you say to them?
I think the most important thing is to know that almost everybody, if they haven't had their own experience, they know somebody who has. And that it's simply a matter of not being afraid to open up the discussion. I got to a point with almost all of these things that I talk about where I said, you know what, first of all, I'm getting too old, and I don't care what anybody thinks about me anymore. And so I will talk about anything to anybody. And what I started to realize is, occasionally there's like there's a little bit of a giggle factor. Then I run into, because I know an awful lot of doctors and lawyers and very skeptical analytic type people. And so so they start to fight with me on issues. But I don't mind that because I've lived in the skeptical world for an awfully long time. So for me, I look at it like I'm educating them about something. And what I started to realize about all of these UFO experiences is that if we don't share them, we are denying ourselves as a human race some of the most extraordinary, truly extraordinary aspects of what it means to be human and to understand what reality is. We've all gotten good at, saying, we live in what we call a consensus reality, which means if you and I both look at the same object and we both agree that it's, the color red, well, then good, it's red. And if somebody comes along and says, well, I think it's kind of orange, we say, no, you're seeing things, or, whatever. But it could be orange. And if enough people show up and say, it really is orange, in fact, it's actually yellow, then you change the entire consensus. And that is what is happening right now with the way we're looking at reality. Reality is a hell of a lot weirder than we all thought.
This is going back to something you said earlier. I've already got the first couple questions, but they're going back to your actual sighting, and I have something interesting to add to that, or a question to add to that. Here's from Brian Coyle in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He says, I am a UFO buff. Tell us more about your sighting. Did the others besides you two see it? Was it reported in the press?
Yeah. Nobody, well, my daughter and I both saw it, and nobody else was around that night. We drove home. My daughter picked up the phone, and she said, I have to call the police. And I said, you know what, put the phone down for a second. I think, let's reconsider this. I said, what exactly are you going to tell the police? And she said, well, that we saw this big UFO in the sky. And I said, no. Here's what I think you should say. You should say, has anybody else reported seeing anything unusual in the sky tonight? So that's what she did. Nobody else reported seeing it. What I didn't know that there were even UFO reporting sites around. That's how little I knew. So I started researching it like crazy. I found out, there were sightings, not nearly as spectacular as what we saw, but there were sightings as close as a couple of miles away that night and the night before.
If you think about it, the way these things, for instance, travel, they could get from, here to a couple miles in a matter of seconds, if not a second, and also years, because if you listen to what Bob Lazar said in '89 when he worked at S4 in '88, reverse engineering a craft, one of the 9 craft that was at S4 that was either given or shot down or traded from different extraterrestrials over the decades, going back to 47 Roswell, or even before that, 41 Missouri, or 42 the Battle of Los Angeles. But most people remember, of course, the Roswell case, but obviously there's evidence to suggest there's a lot more than that. For instance, Texas, 1896, or even 8000 BC in China, the Drop a Stone incident. But nonetheless, one of the things that you have to realize is that if you can affect gravity, then you can affect time. And I never used to believe in time travel. I just thought, how could that be even possible? But, that's just a normal thing. I mean, even Einstein talked about it. If you had the ability to affect, gravity, then you could affect the space-time continuum. Well, the one video, I don't know if you've ever seen it, it's very famous, and it's been validated as true. And it was filmed by a good friend of mine before he passed away, Dr. Roger Lear, who was known as the implant doctor, the alien implant doctor. Over a course of 2 years, there was a craft that was filmed in, I forgot the Sea of Marmara, something like that, off the coast of Turkey. And both years, when you could see this craft, and it was right before dusk, and as the sun was starting to come up, but before it started to rise, just where it was barely enough light, you could see the light on the craft, and it was still there, and then it would disappear. But when they zoomed up into it, you could actually see beings in the window, and they seemed to be moving a lot faster than us. And so Richard Shaw and L.A. Marzulli, who created the Watcher series, did more analysis, found that the original, what people thought were 2 beings, is actually 4, 3 gray-like beings, and then 1 fourth one that seems to be a humanoid, human-looking, meaning same size as us, same skin color as Caucasian, so on and so forth. But the way it was described is, imagine if you have, say, something like a tuner. All you have to do is just tune it, and you could jump years. So essentially, this craft could sit in the same place and just skip days, weeks, times in an instant. And that's what they said this thing did for 3 years over that same day in August. I think 2011 to 2014. I could be wrong about the year. I think it was actually earlier than that. Maybe the final year was 2004. So anyway, the whole point that I was getting at was that what other people saw from a couple miles away and the night before could very well have been the same craft. You know, a lot of people would interpret it that way.
Dr. Lear told me about that same craft that he had witnessed in Turkey.
Yes.
I saw the videos on that. I saw the beings. I know exactly what you're talking about. And yes, that's a theory that has been put out there by a number of people that I know, that any time, and that's a theory, by the way, on you know, how they on cloaking, you know, when they disappear, that they're simply shifting their time zones. And when they reappear, they are reappearing in a time zone, and that may also explain, by the way, why they're only witnessed by certain individuals. Because if you can alter the time zone for only particular individuals, and then cause them to be the only ones to witness something, you know, and not other people, then you've shifted their reality. I'm going to tell you a weird story.
Okay.
You know that one of my mentors was Ingo Swann, who is the guy
Yes.
who's sort of known as the granddaddy of remote viewing. Okay, so I knew him from roughly 2003, 2004, in between that time, to when he passed away in 2013. So that's roughly a 10-year period of time. Okay. And during that time, and by the way, I was working on my book, which you mentioned. It's the previous book to this, that's called Psychic Intuition, Everything You Ever Wanted to Ask But Were Afraid to Know, which finally did get published. The first version of it got published in 2010. All right, so 3 years before he passed. I remember him talking about a guy who he was helping. Now, this guy was an author, and I had completely forgotten about him until somebody mentioned they wanted me to participate in a documentary. And I'd totally forgotten about this guy, and I'd forgotten about Ingo telling me about him. But Ingo said, yeah, this guy's come to me. He wants me to help him with remote viewing, so I'm working with him on that. And I remember feeling a little pang of jealousy at the point, because I was very jealous of my time with Ingo. And he was introducing him to all the guys in the remote viewing field, particularly the guys who used to be in the various, the military unit, and also less so at SRI, but mostly the military guys. And so Ingo used to tell me about that. Mm-hmm. And I had a vague recollection of remembering when his book got published, because I was a little concerned in a very personal level that his book on remote viewing might somehow conflict with my book on, psychic intuition, which does reference remote viewing a little bit. Not like what he was doing. He was doing 100% remote viewing. But I remember all that, okay? And I remembered his name. And as I was thinking about it, and I said, well, I was trying to remember his first name, so I look him up, 3 o'clock in the morning. Sure enough, I'd gotten his first and last name correctly. I check out his book. Yep, I'd remembered the title of his book, so my memory was good. And then I check out the date it was published. And it was published in 1997. And I said, well, that can't be right. And so I check him out all over the internet, 1997. And then I check out his website, and he says he researched this book, and it's the only book he wrote on that topic, between 1993 and 1996. I then check it out with one of my remote viewing friends who I know he interviewed, and I said, do you happen to remember when this author interviewed you? Because I'm having a real problem, because it's impossible that his book got published? Because that would be a decade before I know that he got it published. And the friend said, yeah, it was 1996. So how is that possible? Because here we have 3 remote viewers involved. I know that I did not know Ingo prior to 2003. And yet I have very, very, very distinct memories of discussing this person with Ingo. And I have distinct memories of his book getting published.
That is definitely an anomaly, and I've heard that during remote viewing sessions that, not only could people be looking at the same place, but you could also be looking at different times. Also, your mood may affect the outcome. There's just so much to that. I want to go back to remote viewing. That's a very important topic, but I got 2 questions that are awaiting that are still, one's tied to back to what we were saying earlier, what you were talking about your sighting, but I'm going to wait for that one. I'm going to go in order. This comes from Gary Fritz, Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. Why are the aliens visiting us? Are there many different types of aliens visiting us? And did you remote view them? So it's actually a 3-part question.
Okay,
Gary.
yes. So my understanding is, yes, there are many, many different types of aliens visiting us. And depending on who you ask, you'll get different answers. But what I've been told is that they can be broken down into sort of categories of those who are psychic and those who are not. And within those 2 categories, you have sort of the good guys and the bad guys. And those who are not psychic, in the sort of good guy category, you have those who are interested in trading with us. The bad guy category, they basically just get lost. In the psychic category, you have those who want to help us with our evolution and development. And the bad guy category, you have those who pretty much just want us dead. There are many accounts, if you read into the accounts of people who have had contact or abductions or whatever. And for example, they'll tell. I think the Shermer case in Nebraska in 1967. I think he was talking about. He was told that they were there because they needed electricity. There was if I'm remembering this right, the Cardenas case in Florida, who I think they told him. I might have that wrong, but I think they told him they needed. No, I'm thinking of a British case with a housewife. Her first name was Cynthia. It was something like Applebaum or something like that. But anyway, they told her that they needed titanium that could only be found at the bottom of the sea.
Interesting.
So,
and then you also have the past. I believe it was Zechariah Sitchin. And
yeah, they're looking for gold.
Yeah, and atomic gold, monatomic gold. Sorry, yeah.
Right. So you have a number of different mining issues. You also have, Ingo. He wrote in his book Penetration, which was sort of a fictionalized nonfiction account of his own experiences, where he witnessed a large UFO drawing water out of a reservoir. So they were using water resources also.
Now,
so they're coming for a number of different reasons. And I forgot what the last question was.
Oh, yeah, I could read it to you again. Okay, and it was, of course, so we talked about, why they're visiting us, so the different reasons. Are there many different types of aliens visiting us, which obviously we've established that. And the third question from Gary Fritz was, did you remote view them?
Have I remote viewed them? I don't think I have remote viewed them. I don't know that I'm waiting for them to reveal themselves to me. And so, as a very good friend of mine said to me recently, how do you know that they would that you're not looking at them and because you don't, how would they look anything like what you would expect them to look like? In other words, Jacques Vallée talks a lot in some of his works about, in the old days where, they would describe UFOs as being, the chariots of with fire coming out of them, or the dragons, or they gave all these very poetic names to these things that they had no other words to describe. In other words, how would you know what it is that you're looking at? How would you know that you're not already looking at a lot of alien beings?
Correct. Exactly. If you don't know what you're looking for, then how could you know to look for that and not know that what you're looking for without knowing what it is not right in front of you already and hasn't been amongst you for all your life? And then you've sort of already answered the other question that's been sitting for several minutes here. I read it anyway. This is just to at least honor this listener here. Alice Stotzi, I think that's how you say it, Stotzi or Statsy, Boulder, Colorado. It says, were you and your daughter contacted or abducted during the sighting? You seem to have the symptoms.
Yeah, I think that in retrospect, we've had some other experiences together, and I don't seem to have a memory of anything other than some dream memories of contact with certain types of aliens or watching UFOs, craft flying away. I don't have any memories of any contact in particular. I don't have any, implants or marks or scars or, some people, they have memories right before they have abductions, like they walked outside because they felt like they were being called by a voice, or they saw a really bright light, or, some stuff like that. I don't have any of that stuff. So I'm not willing to go that far. Although I had a friend of mine who was clearly just recently abducted, who ended up with an implant, called me, and she said, did you have any contact, yesterday? It was the previous day. And I thought about it, and I said, well, I don't think so. I said, I strangely fell asleep for 30 hours, which I've never done in my life. But no contact that I can think of. And she said, Anyway, she recalled seeing me during her abduction.
On a mass abduction. That would make perfect sense. Do me one small favor. Keep in touch with that person who's had the implant. I would say this off air, but since this is already public knowledge from the show with Jack Osborne being on last time, he already did a series with him and his father traveling the world, but he wanted to do a series on alien abduction where it culminated in the removal of 3 people's implants. So the goal is to find potential candidates, and we've already lined up several for him to choose from, but it'd be nice if he had more. So if that phone call comes from him again, I will refer him to your friend if your friend is interested. So keep that.
I can tell you, I'll tell you right off the bat, I know plenty of people with implants, and none of them would be willing. I can tell you that right flat out right now.
One thing I realized is that even back, I used to think, with everybody, not knowing the level of our technology or how capable we were, that the implants were simple tracking devices. But yet, a lot of these people who have these implants taken out would find that the ETs would still find them no matter where they were. They could be, say, on a business trip to another country, and they'd be plucked out of a hotel. They could be driving, across through the desert in a different state, if they're living in the United States, and plucked out of their car. We've had 2 people. One of them is a radio host in Australia who talked about being taken while aboard a commercial air flight, to Australia. And I thought that was really crazy, but just the details he had were so precise and fit the profile of what people would say of being taken. So the fact that your friend said she saw you on board of this craft is really fantastic. What else did she tell you? Any other details?
Not really. I mean, other than the fact that there were I said, were there other people? She said yes. I said, did you recognize anybody on board? And she said, yeah, you. And I said, oh, well, that's peculiar. Because as I said, I remember most of my dreams, and I remembered most of my dreams for those 30 hours, and none of them involved UFOs or anything like that. But I did feel very almost drugged in a sense, or I just had to keep going back to sleep. I just couldn't get myself woken up. And she had a similar sensation. She didn't like it. She's very savvy when it comes to dealing with, I think, a variety of non-human kinds of entities, and she didn't want to be there. And they weren't too happy about that. She said everybody was in a seated position, but there were no seats.
I've actually heard that several times. And same thing when people apparently are experimented on, or having some sort of medical checkup. They're laying down on literally nothing. They're levitating 3 feet off the ground, but yet their backs feel like they're touching some sort of metal or glass that's invisible.
Yeah.
So here's another question. This comes from Joseph Martin in shiny Las Vegas, Nevada. It's actually a two-part question. He says, how do we instigate contact, and how do we talk to aliens?
I think, how do we instigate? First of all, you have to. This is, and I say this about the paranormal world as much as I say this about the alien world. And I think that you have, anytime you're dealing with things that are in a non-physical, three-dimensional realm, you're dealing with, let's just call them in a quasi-spirit realm or dimensional realm. You have to be extremely careful what you're trying to connect with. I do believe, having dealt in those realms, that not everything is good. I think that you need to understand who can help you if you run into trouble in those realms. And I think you need to understand your own powers. And that's critical. So I'm always a little concerned about people who go out, into the desert and figure they're going to vector in a UFO and hopefully go up in a craft and have a party. Because I'm not so sure that you want to tag yourself that easily. I mean, I've heard a lot of different stories, and they kind of fall on both sides of the good and bad fence. So, and I don't know. I think it's easier to know maybe in the paranormal world how to direct your message than it is in the alien world. And I think we're dealing with many, 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 many different types of entities.
I'm actually glad you said that, because that is a two-sided coin. First of all, there are people that have talked about having horrible experiences, and I'm not talking about the people who are fearful because it's their first or second time and they don't understand this long ongoing experience. I'm talking about the people who have literally opened up Pandora's box for, I guess, I don't want to really say evil, but I guess you could say that, for entities that don't have the best interest for us or for that particular person in their mind when, contacting. And so you're right. If you're sending out this open invitation, then the very first things that may jump at you may be things that are malevolent, or maybe in the middle that really don't care about you and have a goal that really doesn't matter what happens to humanity for better or for worse.
Yeah, I mean, and assuming that they have powers and abilities to do things like, let's just say, pull your eyeballs out of your head or pull your heart out, or do things that we would consider not particularly possible at this stage, or to drag you around interdimensionally or through time backwards, forwards, or any which way, and drop you into places that you may or may not want to be. Why do you want to play with that in particular? I mean, what makes you feel that you are competent, to be playing in that sandbox?
Agreed. Johnny in London's got some questions. Go ahead, Johnny.
Hi there, Nancy. The first one's coming from Greg in Tallinn, Estonia. He's on Facebook, and he asked Nancy, being a remote viewer, can you look into the past and future events as well as the now live? And also he says, can you see others viewing you when you're remote viewing?
So the answer is yeah. I mean, the great thing about remote viewing is you can go, any which way, forwards, backwards, present, sideways, because time doesn't exist as a chronological thing. It's fantastic. It's an absolutely amazing tool. In terms of sensing being remote viewed, I think there are times when I have sensed being watched, when I have sensed things that I don't know whether they are human or non-human, that are more things like heat signatures. I think there are times when I have intuitively honed in on particular individuals and sensed that they were attempting to connect. So in that way, yeah, I think there is, I think you can sense when somebody's trying to lock in.
And we've got Seppi in Amsterdam. He's asking, can you remote view the dead and where they go after death?
I believe that you can. The problem is, in remote viewing, the only way that you ever know whether you've gotten what they call a hit is whether you've been given feedback. So unless you've got feedback about the afterlife, you don't know whether you accurately viewed it or whether you didn't, or whether it was your imagination.
Now, let me ask you this. This is something really important. We touched on this in the beginning. And, of course, learning how to keep track of your dreams and getting to the point where you don't even have to have dream journals anymore. You literally can remember them, and you look for those clues because, our subconscious is really capable of a lot. We've had several guests talking about the Akashic Records, and I've even heard from a scientist that's come on the show that that there might actually be biological proof of this, scientific proof, and in that for instance, if us Homo sapiens are actually hybrids, meaning that we were created by said beings, and they themselves were created by maybe a dozen or 20 other beings, then the beginning of humanity had in our blood, in our DNA of those beings. And so you have, tens or hundreds of thousands or millions of generations going back to essentially the Adam and Eve story, if that mythical, or the Anunnaki creating us 250,000 years ago. Then in that sense, we're all related. And you always hear about people saying, was it six series or 6 series of separation, or 6 degrees of separation from everybody. that you will know someone who will know someone who will know someone who will know someone who will know me or be related to somebody in that sense. So in other words, it only takes, 6 degrees or up to 7 degrees to be related to everybody on this planet. And if that's the case, then everything running in our DNA has been storing everything that we've ever experienced in this life, in every life leading up to this life, in every life that we've been connected to from on this planet and off this planet. And hence that would be the scientific proof that that the scientist was posing as a theory. Again, it's just a theory of why we would be able to access the Akashic records, or what other people would label as the infinite wisdom. I just think it's a really important, an amazing thing to have said. Nonetheless, what do you think of that before I give it back to Johnny for another question?
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought that the Akashic records, the first time I ever heard that term, I thought, oh, okay, so somebody's got a library?
Yeah.
And what I've come to understand is it's semantics. It is what you're talking about, which it's a form of it's collective, living, eternal wisdom, which you can access in this sort of non-dimensional, non-linear way that I'm talking about. And there's been a lot of discussion because people do like to talk about DNA and, how we would know these things. And I think, Russian scientists came up with a thing, I don't know, must have been about 6 years ago, saying that DNA has a certain, what they called a language to it, so that there are certain conversations that are being had with the molecules. And that, to me, that's totally feasible. And if you can carry that conversation and that memory of that conversation through generations of humanity, then you have a living document, and we are all part of that document.
That's right, and that is pretty much essentially semantics, what the scientist proposed on the show. Exactly what you said, only of course he was using scientific terminology, but that same thing, essentially the same exact thing. Nonetheless, let's go back across the Atlantic pond for another question. What do you got, Johnny?
Well, this one goes beyond the pond. This is our first call in from Thailand. This is Tom in Bangkok on Facebook. And he's asking Nancy, is Hillary Clinton losing her marbles, regressing with her illness that's been disclosed? Or is she possessed by aliens? As a remote viewer, can you see possessed public figures? Do you look at the behind scenes of the POTUS?
Yikes. Okay, well, that's a loaded question.
Yeah, I'd say so.
My concern is that she has some issues going on with her mental capacity, yeah. And I don't feel that it's a form of possession. I think, let me put it this way. I think that there are other people in the political arena who may be possessed on a different level. I think I would maybe qualify her as being controlled, but not possessed.
Now, I'm going to go... did that finish, Johnny? Was that fully answered? Whoever it was?
That's what he's asked for, and she's told him, yeah.
Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure. Now, this was going back to what I was starting to say earlier, that the fact that we talked about in the beginning of the show about, learning how to recall your dreams and looking for clues in them. So this leads to my next question, and it's something we essentially started with. How can someone train to become psychic when they're not, when they don't think they are? Because what I've gathered from all these years of interviewing people, I've learned two things. One, is that all things paranormal are connected, whether it be extraterrestrials, remote viewing, Akashic records, the dead, ghosts, poltergeist activity. It's all sort of in one way, shape, or form connected. So, with that being said, we inherently, I think, are already psychic. It's just a matter of us unlocking that suppressed power. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, completely. I mean, to me, that's sort of like yeah, of course, because if not, none of us could train to become psychic. I mean, you couldn't acquire it. It's not a thing that you can't. It's not an education. It's a thing that you relearn about your own innate human abilities. It's an aspect of allowing. Let me see. It's a way of if you view the world as being a big mass of dots, and reality is simply connecting the dots a certain way. Intuition or psychic ability is simply changing the dots that you're connecting and coming up with a different matrix. And that matrix is equally valid.
And essentially, we are living in some sort of matrix in that sense, in the sense that we are being suppressed a lot of knowledge, that we are not told the truth, and even our food and air and everything that's being polluted is being polluted with the intent of suppressing our powers, such as fluoride in our water, or as some researchers say, weaponized wheat, and so on and so forth.
Nancy, I wanted to ask Nancy, sorry to cut you there, Dr. J, but just while it's come to my thought, when you are remote viewing, I take it that it's a sort of out-of-the-box looking in scenario, and I wondered, when you are in that state of mind or being, what does it look like back inside from the outside looking in?
What does it look from the outside in? How do you mean that?
Well, when you remote view, you obviously pick an area or a subject or a reference point or whatever, and then you imagine the thought of being there. I imagine it like saying someone, imagine being at your front door and putting the key in the door, and how you can instantly be there in that thought. But in remote viewing, I assume it's very similar. And my thought was, in a remote state of mind where you're not in this, here, now, present consciousness, but you're doing what you're doing, is there an opportunity to look back, at self, or back at from the outside looking in point of view? Does that make sense?
When I'm doing that, I'm there, which means I'm not looking back at me at all, because I can't. And very often when I'm there, I'm either connecting in through the eyes of somebody who is there, or I'm right next to them, or I am very often about somewhere between 15 to 30 feet above them.
Interesting. And did you do any of that before you came on the show this evening?
Recently? No. No, but I mean, I've been working on some readings I've been doing. Sure, I've been doing it with that, yeah. And it's the stuff you get is just, it's just scary accurate. It's like, I think I described it once. I said I just feel witchy even to myself. It's just crazy, the stuff you get. And when you can match it up with reality, you just say it's impossible, but you got it. It's true, which means you were there.
Now, we've gone over an hour. I know it's past 11 on your time. We definitely are going to have you back on again. One thing I would like to do, if it's okay with you, is to ask you if you could give any predictions on this show. And mind you, this is an international show, and this will be played again on our affiliates, at least 3 more times, and then it'll get archived. That way, next time we're able to come on, we can compare, what you've said and see which one has come true. Because let me give you an example. Earlier this year, this wasn't so much of a psychic prediction, but it was just, a politician predicting things, said that Bernie Sanders will be our next president. Well, we know now that that's not going to happen because he didn't even, get past the Democratic convention. He literally, handed over all the delegates to Hillary.
Well, it's interesting. I had a dream, it was a lucid dream at one point about a year ago, where somebody rang my doorbell, and I went to answer the door, and there was a man who appeared to be almost drunk on his knees, and he said, Bernie Sanders is going to win the nomination. And that was the end of the dream, and I said, well, that's impossible. And in my opinion now, in retrospect, his nomination was stolen from him.
That's right. And if you saw his face when he was right before he gave that speech where he says, I move to push all the delegates or whatever he said exactly, but it was essentially a formality in the convention to officially give Hillary all his delegates. You looked on his face leading up to that. There was a camera focusing this on the stage, and the camera focusing literally on his face with his wife right next to him, holding his hand. And he did not look happy. He had that look in his eye like, it should be me on that stage. All my supporters are very disappointed. I let them down, and it was stolen from him. Like you said, it was literally stolen from him. And, and one of the few times we were knocked off air because clearly someone out there didn't want this information to be told was when Senator Gravel came on the show and we asked him, is there any election rigging going on in the United States? He says, without a doubt, yes. Election rigging has been going on for dozens of years, if not almost a century, if not longer, maybe even, to the beginning of, the beginning of the United States. Now, I'm not talking about the New World, in the 1500s. I'm talking about after George Washington became the first president. Anyway, let's go back across the Atlantic pond. Johnny, what you got?
We've got Peter again in Cambodia who's called in. I think it's in protest to Thailand maybe, but he's asking, what did you make of the EU? What did you make of the EU speaking about aliens after the BritX?
Oh, yes, it was the EU director or something. He made a speech literally to the world, but specifically to the EU. And he's the French, he was a Frenchman, and he said something along the lines of, I have met with, spoken to, and heard from leaders from other planets, and they are truly worried about us. And that literally went viral in a day. Of course, now you could speak French, so maybe you could actually hear it and let us know what you think about that, off air. But that was really interesting. Did you get a chance to hear or see that part of the news?
No, I didn't hear that, and that's obviously big. I thought I caught something where I thought maybe it was somebody had made a joke that wasn't being taken seriously, but that maybe I was not hearing maybe it was not the same issue. I didn't hear that. That's very, very interesting.
Well, definitely, as soon as this is over, I will definitely get you a link to that and have you hear it, because I would love someone who speaks that language to hear it rather than, reading everywhere else what people have transcribed it to see if what
you don't remember who it was.
I can tell you exactly who it was. It was the EU director. Let me find out for you right now. And everywhere you go, people have used Google Translate, and all this. And the point is they all come. There's very little variation with the translation, but again, it's always in French. Let's see, here it is. It's the EU president says aliens concerned.
His name was Juncker.
Yeah, Jean-Claude Juncker. Jean-Claude Juncker. That's it. Is the European Commission president. Jean-Claude Juncker.
Yeah.
He said, appeared to say he had heard from the leaders of other planets. Anyway, it's a really fantastic statement. So before we go, a couple things. Is there any other anything else you would like to say as far as any thoughts or possible predictions that may come about, say from now to elections, or say to the end of this 2016? When we come back next time, maybe we could talk about to see what has come about and what is still pending or what is not come about. Anything you'd like to say?
I would say my only, and it's a very sort of a vague feeling, but it's an anxiety feeling that there will be a. I don't even think it's a. I'm not even so sure it's a terrorism event, and this feels to me that it will be something in the neighborhood of October-ish, but it almost feels more like a battlefield type of event that has some element of shock and surprise to it. That is it feels like a game changer type of an event that is almost scheduled to have an impact on our election.
Here's something really interesting. I because I just got it, and I have to say this since I have to give credit. Cynthia Collins in I hope I say this. I hope I pronounce this correctly. Cynthia out there, is it Paducah, Kentucky? She says, "I love this guest," with an exclamation mark. Does she have a suggestion as to what she thinks is the best dream interpretation book?
You know, I am the worst person to ask about that, and I always have been, because I don't trust any dream interpretation books, period, end of story, because everybody has their own personal dream symbols and interpretations, and you have to explore what everything means to you. It's really good to explore it with somebody who can sort of walk you through it. But we are every symbol and every person that shows up in our own dream. And I just don't, if you go to a book, it's kind of like, Freud with a cigar. Really, I just don't trust them.
Yeah, agreed. Now, let me ask you this before I ask you about website and books. And of course, again, everybody, like I said, you can already see Nancy's books just by going to our website, clicking on books and videos, finding her name, and clicking on her name. It'll take you to her author page. But if you have one final question, one final statement to say to everybody listening that are believers, skeptics, scientists, politicians, people on the fence, living in at least 42 countries that we've already had people asking questions from, whether through Facebook, Twitter, or chat room, or other places. What would you have to say?
What I'm working on currently that is of most interest to me is trying to create a Rosetta Stone for alien languages. And the way I'm doing that is gathering as much data as I possibly can, not just about actual artifacts with alien languages or actual recordings, but people's memories of them, if they've had abductions and they remember seeing things, but also of the stuff people have always kind of thrown away and disregarded, and I want to bring it back because it's valuable, which is channeled writings, trance writings, automatic writings, dream memories, any of that stuff, because once you start comparing it with each other and with the actual artifacts and the memories, you start to see there's some incredible patterns. So I'm interested in getting from people all over the world, and I've already been doing this, putting together a database of alien written and spoken languages. And I have people that I'm working with who are specialized in languages all over the world who are, helping me work on this. So that's sort of my big project, and hopefully people will, reach out to me.
Now, I want to thank you so much, Nancy. Please hang on till after the show so we could ask you a couple other things real quick. I do want to, again, like I said, thank you so much for taking your time to join us tonight. I also want to acknowledge, of course, our other affiliates. We have Michael Vara and Ira Robinson for Late Night in the Midlands for carrying our show, plus all the terrestrial stations they have. Don't forget Angel Espino, who is also in the East Coast in Florida, running our show on PSN, and of course JC in the United Kingdom carrying our program in, of course, the United Kingdom. As I said, a fantastic network as well, and of course our very own Coast to Coast PM radio network, because we are broadcasting in the PM within the United States. Of course, all these other countries, it's either morning or daytime depending on where you are reaching out to us from. I also want to tell everybody, of course, we always monitor all the different chat rooms that are around and all the different social media, but if possible, we'd like to get you guys to start to try to centralize on our website with the newly formed chat room there, which is all you have to do is go to chat.drjradiolive.com. And remember, like I said, everything is under the same name: Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr, YouTube, Google+, Gmail, the website, Slack, Pinterest, whatever you could think of. It is one word: Dr. J Radio Live, DRJ Radio Live. And remember, you can see all the archived shows on, of course, what did I tell you? YouTube.com/DRJ Radio Live. Let's not forget about the bookstore, as I've mentioned twice throughout the show. Just click on the books and videos link, find Nancy's name and anybody else who's been on the show in the last 2 years. And we are doing our best to add the people who have been on from the 4 years prior to that, from the 6 years of the show. That's almost 6 years coming up soon of this show running. That will soon be added. And don't forget about the Watchers package. You literally save about $60. You get the Watchers 10 series, which is cool because most of that documentary was created by a single phone call that came onto the show when the producers were on. That was L.A. Marzulli and Richard Shaw. You also get in that package L.A. Marzulli's new book on Nephilim, and you get another Watchers disc. I think it was Watchers 7 that he also throws in there, plus a yearly subscription to Prophecy, Paranormal, and Supernatural, something like that. It's all available. All you have to do is just find that, cool little logo emblem Watchers package that they have supplied for us and click on it. And then also, don't forget, if you want to expand your memory, look into the Zox Pro program from Shannon Panzo, who has also reached out to us again today from Australia. Astronaut Edgar Mitchell, before he passed away, was the spokesperson, and I wanted to see if it was true. I reached out to Edgar and said, hey, off the record, I'm not doing this for the show, I just want to ask you personally, does this program work? And he says absolutely, and this is for you to expand your mind and to be able to have a photographic memory, learn to have get 50,000 words a minute and reading 50,000 words a minute. Some people were tested up to 700,000 words a minute. That is phenomenal rates, and that's what the program is labeled as, is a photographic memory I guess course. However, if you look at the reviews, people start to say that once they've been using this for quite some time, that they start interacting with other beings and interdimensionally. They start to remote view. They are able to, have telepathic thoughts, or send and receive telepathic thoughts to other people, and of course open up other abilities such as telekinesis. All you have to do is mention Dr. J to receive the discount. Same thing with David Sarita's 26-week meditation course on cosmic consciousness. Again, it is all available on our website. I also want to thank our crew. We got Johnny in London. I'm going from west to east, who stayed up really this late to be on the show. Got to thank him for all the work he does on the show and off the show. We also have Tom Schaefer, our sound engineer and webmaster. And of course Dan the man, SoCal Dan, taking care of course of our chat room, and Lou Sheehan, who is a great researcher for us and does a lot of work, not to mention all the other people who I have not said, but you guys know who you are. I want to thank you all for helping this show happen. And the most important people that need to be thanked are you, the listener. This is the only reason we do this show. For you guys, remember, knowledge is power and disclosure is in your hands. You have to take what is being heard from all the guests and use whatever is at your disposal. Whether you're a scientist, whether you're a journalist, whether you have access to other people that can spread this information. You're not going to make change in this world. Change is not going to happen with you sitting passively. Please be active. So remember that disclosure is in your hands. With that being said, thank you again all. Thanks again to my guest. Thanks again to my crew. And I am Dr. J of Dr. J Radio Live, and we are officially signing off.